Happy Halloween, Steamies! Since it is the spooky season, I decided to surprise you all with a little ranking video. Every spooky episode of Thomas and Friends from the model era ranked. This might have a few surprises in it for you, as there will be some entries in here that have not been on any of my previous ranking lists, and there will be some episodes that you will think might be at the bottom of the list that could be closer to the top of the list. Because with this special, I have had to adjust my rating criteria for episodes. Again, these are all my own personal opinions, and yours will be different than mine. That's the one thing that makes the Thomas fandom so unique. And let me know in the comments how you would rank the spooky episodes of Thomas and Friends. All I ask is that you be respectful, and above all, enjoy the video. Okay, let's dive in. Number 19, Jack Frost. Okay, that's the only one that you'll probably predict was at the bottom of the list. I did want to place it higher, just to give you a surprise and try and find good things about it, but they just weren't there. Sorry. Number 18, Bad Day at Castle Lock. This will probably be a surprise for you, as you all know my fondness of the Scottish twin engines, Donald and Douglas. Well, I did find it quite ironic after watching the spooky episodes back to back that Donald and Douglas get creeped out after them winding up Percy in a Series 6 episode that will appear on this list, and that their brake van getting hit by a landslide is very Season 2-esque. The Scottish twins and brake vans do not get along very well. It's the fact that there was only a tiny bit of spookiness in this episode. The rest of it is pretty slice of life, and that's why it is lower down. The nighttime scene may not be long, but it is impressive in its visuals. It's still classic David Mitton, and it just gives you that little feeling of uncertainty that it's always known for. Number 17, Emily's New Route. What really sells me on the spook factor for this episode is the musical score by Robert Hartshorn. When the Blacklock monster is mentioned the first time by James, the music change really sends a chill up your spine, which is impressive considering it is meant to be a summertime episode. The entire scene at Blacklock does give you a sense of dread. It's not only down to the musical score from Hartshorn, but the fact of Emily shaking on her own. While I'm not a big fan of that because it does lead you into the precursor of Blubba territory, it does show you how scared Emily is, and it's very effective for a summer episode. Number 16, Fergus Breaks the Rules. I do think that the smelter scene in this episode is better than the one in the Series 6 episode Scaredy Engines, but the reason it's lower down is because there isn't as much to it as there is in that episode. The old mine track is really creepy, and there are some great night scenes, and while the story itself isn't meant to be spooky, it gives you that ick factor when Fergus arrives at the smelter's yard and is confronted with Ari and Bert. I also like that this episode finally gave Diesel a permanent location to work, which was the smelters. Every other time up to this point, he's just turning up to an assigned job, causing chaos, and then buggering off. At least this time, we now know where he's going to be for the foreseeable future. And working with his own kind as well, which actually felt like less of a punishment because at least he'd have his brothers in arms around him. Number 15, Percy and the Haunted Mine. Hey, garden gnomes can be creepy. If you ever look at them at a dark night, you will know what I mean. I like the visuals of this episode, and some of those scenes, like the building sinking into the ground and the smoke and mist effects, felt very Season 2 Ghost Train-esque, so I gotta give it props for that. Well, not exactly one I would be cowering under my blanket over, it did make me feel a bit more uneasy than the previous ones on this list. Number 14, The Magic Lamp. It's not overly spooky, but more so than the others. Again, I like that we get introduced to a mythical character of Proteus. Not a fan of the rhyming speech, even though I knew worse was to come, but the sets and the general effects of the episode at night time were very impressive, and they lasted a lot longer than some of the other episodes I mentioned, which gave you more of that sense of unease. Number 13, Scaredy Engines. I've mentioned previously that I wasn't as big a fan of the Smelter's Yard in Season 6 as I am in Season 5, and I stand by that. When you compare the two, there is a clear difference in creep factor, but there's still enough of it that it can make you feel really uneasy. And the trio of Thomas, Percy and Duck was an absolute winner from this episode. If it wasn't those three engines, I don't think it would have been pulled off as effectively as any other ones would have done. Maybe Gordon, Henry and James. Not one you're necessarily hiding under the blanket for, but is spooky throughout. Number 12, Thomas, Percy and the Dragon. This was where I started to think that there was more to David Mitten's nighttime scary aesthetic than met the eye, because it wasn't all about jump scares and trying to make you wet yourself. From the very moment that those points jam and Percy can't get out of that signal, right up until he sees the Chinese dragon and he is wetting himself for his driver, you feel so uneasy. It's a prime example of how less can be more in a scary situation. I like this episode because it was the resolution to Ghost Train that I never knew I wanted or necessarily needed, but I got and I was happy with. It's the first appearance of the Chinese dragon, even though the incidental music could be considered racist by today's standards. And I didn't like the fact that all the ninjas just ripped the absolute piss out of Percy because he thought he saw a dragon. It was a little bit cruel. Number 11, Rusty to the rescue. You might expect this one to be a bit higher up because of the scenery of the scrapyards and the ominous voices of all the diesels speaking in unison when Rusty arrives to try and find Stepney. And while that scene is creepy, again, because I was so scared by the other railway and escape, it did feel like a downgrade. It was done well, as a lot of the classic series episodes are that are meant to give you the fear factor, but it's why it just shades outside the top 10. Number 10. Bold and Brave. A hit era episode beating a classic era episode. I told you there would be some surprises in here. While not necessarily a Halloween style or spooky style episode because it is set in the middle of summer, it's the music, again, that sells it for me. From the second that Diesel mentions about the curse of the cliffs to Thomas, right up until the resolution, every piece of music that is used in this episode has an uneasy, unnerving feel to it. It's the slow burn of just making you feel a little bit uneasy at the start, and it just builds and builds and builds through the music rather than necessarily what is being shown on screen. It straightens your back out and gives you that little bit of fear that you didn't realise was there. The fog scene at the cliffs was well done, although a little bit unrealistic because it drops and then leaves, and it's also fog in the middle of summer when it's meant to be like absolutely scorching weather. But a not bad episode, especially for hit era standards. Number 9, Rusty and the Boulder. I got a lot of flack for putting this in my worst list for season 5, but I did say there would have been controversial places there, and again, it's a controversial placing here. But it is in the top 10 for a reason, and again, like the previous entry, you get that uneasy feeling at the start of the episode, and you get the real unease of it at the end of the episode. The difference between the two is that you don't get it in the middle, because it's bombastic action of a boulder trying to crush everything in sight. I still think that they should have just destroyed the boulder after it caused all that damage. Should have just got Thumper and just annihilated the bugger, rather than putting it back up in its perch so it can potentially cause more damage down the line. Yes, I know, that's a pun. But the parts where it's meant to make you feel unease, it really hammers it home. And the parts where it's meant to be bombastic action, it is of course bombastic action. Number 8, Flower Power. Here we go. Why did you put Flower Power above Rusty and the Boulder? Simple reason, it's a Halloween specific episode. And I liked that about the hit era, that they had a lot more spooky and Halloween themed episodes than it did in the classic era, even if it's only 2. Not everybody celebrates Christmas. At least with it being Halloween, it felt more inclusive to everybody, because a lot more people I think celebrate Halloween around the world than they do Christmas. Fat Controller is a bit of a making Thomas work with Diesel just because he wants him and his wife to get some crumpets the next morning. I know he does mention about the toast for the kids, but that's said like it's an afterthought and he's just thinking about himself. What a prick. But from when Thomas and Diesel start working together, the nighttime scenes are really effective, as is the incidental music. You have both factors that create a real sense of uneasiness. I liked how the haunted forest was portrayed as well as the abandoned mine. And Thomas's trick on Diesel was pretty amusing, even though it did bite him in the tender because he was left to do all the work by himself. But it also showed you how brave Thomas was, because even though he was scared to do the job by himself, he did it anyway, and he did it well, overcoming his fears. Pretty solid Halloween episode. Number 7, Escape. Not a Halloween episode, but boy, it scared the crap out of me as a kid, and still does today as an adult. From when you see Douglas starting his work on the other railway to when he gets over the border with Oliver and Toad, oh, you are on tenterhooks the whole time. You are scared, stiff. The look of Oliver and how he is when he's in his scrapped mode is terrifying. The use of lighting, the use of music, the use of the scenery, the use of the effects, it just all ties in so well. The only reason that it is lowered down is because it's only for one scene. The start and the end are just exactly the same as any other episode, but that middle chunk, oh, chills. Number 6, Toby's Discovery. Again, this episode is like 2 episodes put together with totally different kinds of scenarios. Starts off that Toby's taking the Fat Controller and his grandkids for a little adventure. Pretty bog standard Thomas stuff. And then once they find that part of the island and hear about the old warrior and all the scary things, and the night comes is when it just changes. Everything becomes uneasy. Everything becomes scary. The entire aesthetic of season 5 was very creepy and earthy and dirty, so it made sense for it to go down that route. Number 5. Halloween. A really strong season 8 Halloween episode. In this instance, I like the pairing of Thomas and Emily. I don't want to say childish, but he's more timid, more scared. Emily's trying to act like she's not scared of anything, but really you know she's absolutely terrified. And having Ari and Bert being the pranksters that in turn get absolutely scared witless, great scene. Great incidental music. Shows you lots of different parts of the island at night time. A Halloween episode that you could put on with your kids and you would get a little bit of a jump as well, along with your kids. Again, I wasn't a fan of CGI Ghost at the end, but I've learned to get past that. It just ties in with the overall spooky nature of the Halloween themed episode. Number 4, Ghost Train. The episode that I believe started it all when it comes to the types of spooky scenarios and environments that the island of Sodor could become in later seasons. From the very start of the episode until the very end, it does not let up with its spook factor. The Ghost Train story would make your wheels wobble to think of it. Then the rest of the time, it just carries on from there and does not let up. I've already mentioned how Thomas is a bit of a prick because he's just going, oh, my best friend's dead. Damn, my train's going to be late. But I do love that Toby and Percy both just scare the absolute bejesus out of him. It was pretty funny. And also spooky as well. The close-up shot of Thomas Resin's face where he's terrified still gives me nightmares. Speaking of nightmares, number 3, Stepney gets lost. Everything from when Stepney leaves that quarry right up until the end is nightmare fuel. I was worried thinking, they're just generally going to kill this character off right now. It was one where you genuinely thought Stepney was going to meet his maker. And the aesthetic of the smelter's yard, the eerie red lighting over Ari and Bert, the fact that hardly any music is used from once Bert is buffered up the Stepney and you're just left to embrace the silence as all the workings of the smelter's yard around him signal that it's going to be the end. Terrifying. Proof that at this point in time, Thomas and Friends was not just a kids' show. Number 2, Duncan gets spooked. Anybody who's watched my worst lists of season 5 will be surprised that this episode is pretty high up on the list, but it's there for good reason. You can't deny the absolute chill factor that this episode gives you. It was probably why I put it down in my worst list, because I do hate being scared. I am a giant scaredy cat. I jump at the slightest things. Do not get me started on jump scares. So it would have been low down on that list because it made me very scared. So by logical conclusion, it should be high up on this list because it made me scared. It made me not like it. It made me not want to watch it because I felt uneasy and frightened. And that's what these type of episodes are meant to do. They're meant to scare you. So by that logic, it should be at number 2, but not as high as number 1, Haunted Henry. Holy crap, this episode does not let up at all. Everything about it is terrifying. Those resin faces on the trucks give many a fan a nightmare, and they still give me nightmares. The entire aesthetic of the episodes, chilling. Don't need much incidental music to just really ram that sense of fear and terror right through you. And the fact that it's Henry that's used as our protagonist for this, when you watch it, you can then put it into perspective of why Henry would become the scaredy cat character. He had a lot of traumatizing stuff going on during this time. This episode does make me understand a bit more why he is so scared, because it also made me scared. And that is my ranking video of every spooky episode from the model era of Thomas and Friends. Let me know in the comments what ranking you would put these spooky episodes in. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on chugging.